So yesterday evening we spoke that a former WWE superstar was set to make their Impact Wrestling debut on last night's edition of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. Now at the time we didn't know who that former WWE superstar was. The only thing that we knew, and this was a report initially coming from PW Insider, the only thing we did know going into last night's episode of Impact Wrestling is that this was a former WWE star that didn't get the chance that they deserved in WWE. Now we speculated last night who it was going to be. One of those names that we speculated it could be turned out to be correct, that being former WWE superstar and forgotten son, he's forgotten no more, that being Steve Cutler, now known as Steve Maclin, because Steve Maclin is headed for Impact Wrestling and the Impact Zone. On last night's edition of Impact Wrestling, the June 3rd episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV, a vignette aired showing Maclin sitting in front of a stack of papers, presumably one would think an Impact Wrestling contract in this situation, while pouring himself another Jameson. Now, the mirrors in the videos that have been he released online following his WWE departure, Impact then tweeted out that he would be coming soon. So Steve Maclin, Steve Cutler, let's call him Maclin going forward. He'd been doing these kind of teases on social media anyway, but now it's confirmed that these teases were all part of his upcoming Impact Wrestling debut. Now, of course, Maclin, formerly known as Steve Cutler, was released by WWE on February 4th earlier this year after several years in NXT and then less than a year on the WWE main roster as part of the SmackDown brand. Now, he had last competed as part of the Forgotten Sons faction alongside Wesley Blake and Jackson Riker. Blake has since been let go, while Riker continues to perform on Raw in a team, well, used to be in a team with Elias. Of course, he was part of the Knights of the Lone Wolf faction with King Corbin last year as well. And then it was subsequently reported, whilst he was released earlier this year in February, that he had been released after Vince McMahon essentially threw a big hissy fit, deciding that it was unprofessional and inappropriate that Steve Cutler had contracted COVID after attending a New Year's Eve party. That's why the Knights of the Lone Wolf were pulled from television. That's why he was let go. All of that kind of stuff. That's why I guess eventually Wesley Blake was let go, because this was a guy that twice in a row they'd had gimmicks that were pulled away. Anyway, as soon as Steve Maclin was released by WWE earlier this year, we actually did a video talking about it on the channel. So it's not totally surprising that this would happen, but we speculated here at the time, or certainly I did, saying, where does he go next? And for me, the most likely destination always was Impact Wrestling. Why? Obviously, you can talk about the Deonna Purrazzo connection. I think that's probably fair. Although just because, for full transparency, just because you are the partner or your partners in the world of professional wrestling, that doesn't mean once you're released from one company, you just go to where they're working. It doesn't tend to work like that. But in this case, it made a lot of sense. Not only, of course, I mentioned being partners with Deonna Purrazzo, the Impact Wrestling Knockouts champion, but also from what you can gather on social media, he certainly is friendly with a lot of people in Impact Wrestling. At that very same New Year's Eve party, which was a flashpoint towards the end of his WWE career, you had the likes of Rich Swann, who at the time was the Impact World Champion, Su Yung, of course, big prominent figure in the Knockouts division in Impact Wrestling too. Once you've got all of those feelers in there, and you have to look at it this way as well, that Impact Wrestling are looking to make a statement. They're looking to create buzz. This is going to be the first of many former WWE names that are either going to debut or return to Impact Wrestling over the course of the next few months. We know about the talent that was released by WWE back in April, whether that's Samoa Joe, whether that's the Iconics, Billy Kay and Peyton Royce, whether that's Chelsea Green, whether that's Kalisto, whether it's Wesley Blake as well. Maybe Wesley Blake joins Steve Cutler or Steve Maclin in Impact Wrestling going forward as well. That's a possibility too. So with all of those names, obviously there are going to be some that show up at Impact Wrestling Slammiversary in July, and we are going to be doing a separate video talking about the big announcement when it comes to Slammiversary made last night too. So because Impact Wrestling, I see this as several prongs to this announcement, several prongs to this signing by Impact Wrestling. First of all, I see it as a situation, like I said, they're trying to generate momentum. They're trying to generate hype. Because as I mentioned, not only did they have this vignette airing last night on Impact Wrestling, but they also had the Slammiversary announcement as well. So they're kind of laying the groundwork as if to say, look, Slammiversary is coming in July. We've done all of these teasers so far where we've put in images and graphics of former Impact Wrestling stars, whether it's Samoa Joe, whether it's New Japan Pro Wrestling stars like Okada and Naito, whether it's Chelsea Green coming back to Impact, whether it's the now former WWE superstars that they've teased as well. They teased the Forgotten Sons. They even teased Daniel Bryan. They teased the Iconics. They've teased everyone. just as they did last year. And remember, when they did it last year as well, a lot of the names that they did tease did end up showing up for Impact Wrestling, whether that was Eric Young, whether that was EC3, whether that was Heath, a new Impact Wrestling star, whether it was whoever. Brian Myers, they teased as well. He showed up on the following episode of Impact Wrestling on Access TV. They teased Matt Cardona. He didn't come immediately. He came in January of this year, but they teased the Good Brothers as well. They signed them too. All of these names that they teased last year, Impact Wrestling, frankly, had a pretty good record on delivering on all of these teases. It was only a select few names that they teased that they didn't deliver last year. One of them was Aces and Eights. One character, I guess, was Super Eric, even though they did deliver Eric Young in the end too. So who's to say that all of these vignettes that they're doing Impact Wrestling, they don't deliver on the majority of these names? I would be flabbergasted, absolutely flabbergasted, if between now and Slammiversary, the only former WWE superstar that shows up is Steve Maclin. That's just not going to happen. This is the beginning, and I think Impact Wrestling look at this for several reasons. They say, first of all, Steve Maclin obviously was a talent. I think it's very fair to say that he didn't get the opportunity that, I don't know if maybe he deserved, but he certainly didn't get the opportunity that maybe was warranted in WWE. You look at his career in NXT, where the Forgotten Sons, a real standout NXT tag team. You know, the gimmick was never really for me. I never latched on to it. I mean, I don't know if that's a thing with me being over here in the UK. I don't know. Obviously, it was based on all of these guys having military backgrounds. Steve Maclin has a military background, so does Jackson Riker and Wesley Blake. All that kind of stuff. I get that, and maybe that's just because I didn't. Maybe that's a UK, United States kind of situation there, but I never really latched onto that. But obviously they were talented and they were featured heavily in NXT. They competed for the NXT Tag Team Championships on numerous occasions and obviously got called up to SmackDown last year during the pandemic, during the craziness that was those WWE Performance Center shows for Raw and SmackDown. So despite, I guess, it being in the pandemic era, despite it being on a closed set in the Performance Center, it's still SmackDown on Fox. It's still on network television, and they still were doing promos and vignettes on that show. And then, obviously, with the other craziness that was going on in the world, not just with the pandemic, but also the political side of things as well, during that time period, there's a lot going on. Jackson Riker tweets out some support for the former president of the United States, and then suddenly everyone in that locker room says, nope, don't want to work with the Forgotten Sons anymore. By proxy, just by proxy, Steve Maclin and Wesley Blake suddenly had a ton of heat on them. Now, I don't think anyone in the locker room really blamed them that much, but they certainly didn't want to be around Jackson Riker, and they didn't want to work with him at that time. And what are Maclin and Wesley Blake going to do? They were kind of stuck at that point. So they get taken off of television, the gimmick gets dropped. Now, eventually, they all got brought back in their own way to television. Jackson Riker's paired with Elias on Monday Night Raw. Maclin and Wesley Blake teamed up with King Corbin and the Knights of the Lone Wolf faction on SmackDown. And then, as I mentioned, because of Maclin contracting COVID in late December, early January, attending that New Year's Eve party, Vince McMahon throws a hissy fit. That whole gimmick gets pulled off of television, and then eventually Maclin gets released, and then Wesley Blake gets released in April. The irony is, after debuting on SmackDown last year, the guy that actually got the Forgotten Sons pulled off of television, the guy that, had all of these problems in the first place, he's the guy that's still with WWE. And on top of that, not only is he the guy that's still with WWE, in addition to all of that, they're trying to turn him babyface on Monday Night Raw currently. This past week, the whole breakup with Elias, that was all to try and turn Jackson Riker babyface. How is anyone going to cheer him? I don't know. Maybe it depends on the state and the town that they're in. I know they're trying to play on the military background again, but I just don't see that working. I don't think anyone sees that working apart from WWE. It's just crazy. It's crazy when you think about it, really, isn't it? It really is just a crazy situation. But as far as the vignette last night on Impact Wrestling, I thought it was very well done. I really liked the contrasting sort of production that they went for. Again, it mirrors what Steve Maclin has been doing on social media anyway in terms of these vignettes. But essentially, as I mentioned, you've got the contract, and it looks like Maclin, who looks to be in great shape, by the way. Obviously, he's got a bit of a haircut as well, shaved the beard, looks, it's difficult to recognize him. Some people really genuinely didn't recognize him initially, which I found quite humorous. But you've got, the dimly lit sort of bar scene where he's pouring himself a Jameson, but you've also essentially got some swing music playing in the background. You've got some sort of, it felt very much like, I don't know, The Punisher was kind of my comparison. I moved it to, if you're a fan of either the Marvel TV series on Netflix, that was really good, or some of the Punisher films they've done, certainly the Punisher comics. It's that kind of Maybe is that the kind of character they're going for? I don't know. But I think that's a good kind of comparison, though, because the Punisher, if you know the backstory of that is an ex-military guy that sort of comes home and has got this sort of family tragedy and kind of, again, he's an anti-hero, certainly, but he's got questionable morals and he doesn't really care about hurting people and all that kind of stuff. Are they going to try and do a Punisher version when it comes to Steve Maclin in Impact Wrestling? I don't know. I think they probably will play off his military background once again and this service background. I don't think that's a question, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Like I said, just because I didn't really attach that in NXT, that's not because, you know, I don't like military gimmicks or anything like that. That was just the case of that gimmick wasn't for me. I'm a huge fan of the Punisher, massive fan of the Punisher. And I thought Steve Maclin looked physically great. Again, I really liked the vignette. I really, really liked the production style of it. So I'm excited to see what he can do. And I think that's the biggest thing coming out of all of this is, yeah, he didn't get a good shot in WWE. Now, does he deserve a shot? Nobody really deserves anything in the world of professional wrestling, really. And these things work out the way that they work out. But I'm excited to see him get an opportunity. I'm excited to see where this character goes. I'm all for new characters in Impact Wrestling. I'm all for refreshing things. And I'm all for people getting a chance. Absolutely, I'm all for everyone getting a chance. And I mentioned it before when Impact Wrestling signed these names last year. Sometimes these are the best people to sign because they have a huge chip on their shoulder. Look at Eric Young last year. Talk about a guy that had a chip on his shoulder, and look at a guy that thrived with that chip on his shoulder. Eric Young, during those last 18 months or so in WWE, was nothing. Absolutely nothing. He barely appeared on any programming apart from main event. He maybe appeared on Raw like once or twice, didn't get an entrance, and got beat in about a minute and a half. This was a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion. This was a guy that had a huge amount of success in Impact Wrestling, but after that, also a huge amount of success in NXT. He was part of the Sanity faction. He was in War Games matches, and he was reduced to nothing on the main roster in WWE. So much so that when he got released by WWE in April, not wanting to be harsh, but I don't know if a lot of people really cared. And when he came back in Impact Wrestling, people went, well, that's great. Eric Young's back home. He did great things in Impact, but the last time we saw him on WWE television, this guy wasn't hot at all. He was ice cold. He was practically a corpse. And in a matter of just minutes at Slammiversary last year, he reinvented himself once again and became one of the hottest acts in Impact last year. Now, can Steve Maclin do the same thing this year? I don't know. That's maybe a big ask for him. Maybe he doesn't have the pedigree of Eric Young. He's a bit more of an unknown, I would say. But again, if that vignette is anything to go by, it looks to be an interesting character. And that's a great place to start off. An interesting character with a ton to prove, with a chip on his shoulder. Hey, I'm all for it. So I'm excited to see where he goes going forward in Impact Wrestling and where these vignettes go and where they lead going forward. Now, a couple of other things I did want to talk about from Impact Wrestling. Again, as I mentioned, we are going to be doing a video talking about Slammiversary, obviously the ticket announcements, and there were a ton of matches announced for Against All Odds. So I'm going to be doing that in a separate video talking about all of that, so don't worry, we will cover that in a video that will drop later today. But I did want to talk about the X Division because obviously the X Division Championship match, the Iron Man match, the 60-minute Iron Man match was such a big feature of Impact Wrestling last night on Access TV. You had the majority of it on Before the Impact. It concluded on Impact Wrestling last night. It was brilliant. I mean, I could and probably should go into a real in-depth review on it. It was that good. But my words won't do it justice. The best thing I can say about that 60-minute Iron Man match, go watch it. Go watch it because it is 60 minutes, but it goes like that. I know this is the second time I've clicked in this video, but it goes so quickly because it's so great. The pacing on it, the spots in it, it's as good as people were hyping it up to be. A lot of the talents prior to it airing were saying how great it was and one of the best matches they've seen live and all that kind of stuff. It really is very, very good. And this is by design by Impact Wrestling because reportedly, Impact Wrestling is planning on putting way more emphasis on the X Division Championship. Now, as I just mentioned, last night's Before the Impact episode on Access TV featured the first ever 60-minute Iron Man match for the X Division Championship with Josh Alexander defeating TJP. Now, in an update, the idea behind last night's Iron Man match is to elevate the X Division Championship in a major way going forward. This is according to a report by PW Insider, who was first to report yesterday about the former WWE star coming over to Impact Wrestling and debuting on the show. So they've certainly been very in touch of Impact recently. Now, one source, according to PW Insider, compared the X Division push plans to when WWE Hall of Famer Rob Van Dam held the ECW World Television Championship for 700 days from April 4th, 1998 until it was vacated on March 4, 2000 due to injury. That was the longest ECW World Television Championship reign in history, and the idea that the title was just as important as the ECW World Heavyweight Championship. That is what Impact is hoping to achieve with the X Division Championship. Now, last night's Iron Man match was described as must-see by various sources who were present for the taping, with others giving it rave review, and they weren't wrong. Ringing out to Dave Penza noted that the match was one of, if not the greatest pro wrestling match he's seen during his 44 years in the business. that's pretty big praise by someone like Dave Penza, who has literally seen it all. I mean, he was there for some of the biggest matches in WCW history and obviously TNA history as well. So for him to give it that high praise, it's pretty incredible. But I like this story. I really like this story because if you've watched this channel, particularly if you watched any of the Impact Wrestling videos I did at the end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021, I said this would be a big year for the X Division. I said that Impact Wrestling needed to put a greater emphasis on the X Division. For years and years, the X Division Championship and the X Division in general had kind of gone like that, and that it had its up and downs, and that's part of pro wrestling. I get that, but the X Division, if you've been a fan of Impact Wrestling for a long time, it's really special because it's really different, it's really unique, and the tagline is, it's not about weight limits, it's about no limits. I know it's cliche, but it's true. The X Division isn't a cruiserweight division. I think people that say that are just wrong, and they don't get it, and they don't understand the history of it. It's about a hybrid of styles. The X Division Championship is all about having the best match on the show and having the most unique match on the show, and it's going to be the match that sometimes when it comes to pro wrestling cards, certainly when Impact Wrestling, TNA Wrestling, NWA TNA was first founded in the early 2000s, that was during a time period that was still kind of from the 90s, in that sometimes the best wrestling match on the show wouldn't be the main event. The main event would be an attraction. It would feature heavyweights or just blockbuster wrestlers that maybe weren't the best wrestlers on the show, but they might be the most entertaining, or they might have the most over-the-top and flamboyant character, or maybe cut the best promo. But really, truly, the best match on the show might be the opening match, or it might be for the Cruiserweight Championship in WCW, or it might be for the Intercontinental Championship in WWE, or in ECW, it might be for the Television Championship or something like that. That's what the X Division Championship was. It was about crazy, high-flying stuff, but it was also about catch-as-catch-can pro wrestling, European, United Kingdom-based wrestling, chain wrestling, lucha libre style, submission wrestling. It was everything, and hybrid styles and Japanese strong style, you name it. That's what the X Division was all about. It was about merging that all together and having the best match on the show. And I mentioned previously that I felt that the X Division, over the years of the different ownerships and the different directions and all this kind of stuff, had lost its identity in Impact Wrestling. And whilst it had been brought back, especially in the Scott D'Amore and Don Callis years, it still did feel like it wasn't a priority for Impact Wrestling, which felt odd because when you look at Impact Wrestling, what differentiates it from other companies and other promotions, one being the Knockouts division, which is the cornerstone of the product, another is the X Division, because it is unique, it is different. And I felt that they needed to go back, not just to having high flyers, but also to have so many different styles of champion in there. I was a big fan of having Willie Mack, for instance, as the X Division champion, because he's what the X Division is. He's a big guy, he can do high-flying stuff, but he has crazy great matches. When Ace Austin was the X Division champion earlier this year, I was really happy to see that, because Ace Austin is a guy that I consider to be one of the futures of Impact Wrestling. Yes, he can do high-flying stuff, but also he's a built-up guy, and he can do lots of different styles of wrestling. And I was really happy to see Josh Alexander win it earlier this year at Impact Rebellion, because this is a guy that reminds me of maybe like a different version of a Samoa Joe, of someone obviously who's got a amateur wrestling background, can do some incredible stuff, high flying, but he doesn't need to. He just has great matches, and especially when someone like him, who is such a great mat wrestler and a technical wrestler, when he goes up against the high flyer, that's a match made in heaven. Styles make matchups, and styles make absolute classics. So I was really happy to see Josh Alexander become the X Division champion earlier this year, and we've been rewarded for it so far. The match he had at Rebellion was fantastic. His defense against El Phantasmo at Impact Under Siege was great. Obviously, the Iron Man match was unbelievable last night. That's what I'm excited to see. So I'm really excited to see that Impact are taking the X Division seriously, and they're trying to elevate this championship up to a level where it's level with the Impact World Championship, which is smart, because maybe Kenny Omega, of course, he's going to be the Impact World Champion, possibly for a while. Maybe the earliest he drops it is Slammiversary. But if Kenny Omega's got a really long championship reign coming up, you need to have a championship like the X Division Championship that's at the same level, that takes priority, because maybe Kenny Omega isn't going to be there all the time. So it's smart by Impact. So I'm really glad to hear that story. I think it's a fantastic story, and I think it's the right thing to do. But if you haven't watched that match from last night, go and watch it. It is fantastic. Finally, I did want to talk about the announcement, or one of the announcements made at last night's show. Every time you thought there was going to be the show closing announcement, just something else happened. But it's very interesting because in the main event of last night's show, the Good Brothers interfered in the Sami Callihan and Moose main event, causing a disqualification. Kenny Omega then came out and joined them, specifically targeting Moose, who of course is his opponent at Against All Odds. Now backstage, Impact Wrestling Executive Vice President Scott D'Amore informed the other Executive Vice President, not in real life now, but on screen certainly, that because of this disqualification finish, Sami Callihan now has a victory over Moose, the #1 contender, and thus believes a World Championship match next weekend at Against All Odds should now be a triple threat match. Callis said that Tony Khan would never go for that. He talked about Sami Callihan being blackballed from AEW and all that kind of stuff. Now, Scott D'Amore said, well, I thought you would say that, and I actually called Tony Khan ahead of time, and he revealed that Tony Khan will be on Impact Wrestling next week, Thursday, June 10th, to sort everything out. So Tony Khan is going to be there next week on Impact Wrestling. I guess in person, I guess in a segment. Lord knows that it caused a lot of controversy when Tony Khan cut a promo on social media last week, so maybe another one that he does will really annoy people as well. I don't know. I find that stuff to be, humorous when they get so angry about it. I'm excited, and I think the destination that we're going in now, I think the destination that we're probably looking at is probably a scenario where I think we see a situation where it's going to be, obviously, the Against All Odds will be turned into a triple threat match. Kenny Omega versus Moose versus Sami Callihan, and then that probably have a situation where Omega pins Sami Callihan at Against All Odds. That then transitions into Moose facing Kenny Omega in a singles match at Slammiversary. So I think that's probably the direction that they're going in, but we'll talk way more in depth about that going forward over the course of the next 7 days or so. So, look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of the Impact Wrestling news we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, WWE, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.